all have a story to tell, and the telling of those stories can be an amazingly powerful experience. That's what we discovered when the One Book, One Community project of Monroe County invited area residents to tell their stories, in print in the Monroe Evening News and its website, and in video form at the Monroe Public Access TV studios, as well as at the One Book kickoff event. The book selected as this year's One Book novel is One Amazing Thing by Chitra Divakaruni. It's the story of 9 people trapped in a basement. Faced with the possibility of death, one of them suggests that they share one amazing thing about their lives. Through their stories, they give us a window into their dreams, their secrets, their fears. This video is a collection of some of the One Amazing Thing stories told by Monroe County residents. I think they're amazing, and I hope you enjoy them.
My name is Andre Watson, and this is my amazing story. Back in 1990, 91, in those years, it's been a little while, I was with some friends over the weekend out in Garden City, Michigan, and we were walking down the street together, and when we got to a corner, I was struck by a car. The car actually run partially up on the curb, run me over, and in the process of me being run over by the vehicle, my leg actually my shoe trapped itself behind the wheel well of the rear tire. The driver continued to drive, I guess trying to take off, but he drugged me for about 4 blocks. The police said at about 65, 70 miles an hour. I sustained injuries to my legs, head, my arms, and during the time I was being drugged, I was hollering. Obviously anybody would scream in a situation like that. I tried to grab hold of the car to try to get up on the side of it while he was driving, but my leg was trapped in the wheel well, and all the time the tire was burning away what was the lower portion of my right leg on the outside. A passenger in the car with the driver was actually trying to kick me loose because they popped the hatch open. They were trying to kick me loose, I guess, to try to get me off the car so you can take off, but he wasn't able to. He actually ended up having to stop the car and back up so that my shoe can dislodge from the rear wheel well of the car. Make a long story short, I was helivaced from Garden City Hospital over to University of Michigan, a hospital where I went through extensive surgeries, skin grafts, stayed clean. They said embedded rubber all the way down to the bone in my leg, and I wasn't able to walk, stand for pretty much over a good 10-year period. It took me to rehab. The funny part about it, not funny, was I was a basketball star at Southwestern Detroit High School with Jalen Rose and Rashawn Leonard. At the time of this incident, we were on like our break, and I was actually set to start for Perry Watson on the basketball team that following season that was coming up. And so that took away that dream of mine, also my ability to function normally like I was able to prior. And it all boiled down to a driver that admitted that he didn't believe that a person of my color belonged in his neighborhood. He was trying to scare me by driving as closest to me as he said. He didn't mean to hit me, but obviously it didn't work out that way. And it didn't make me bitter in the end. What ended up happening is, while I was in the hospital for that long, extensive stay, I received visits from people I'd never met, didn't know. Lots of people different. It was diverse. I mean, people would walk in and say, "Hey, my name is so-and-so. I heard about your incident." And the pour out of love and gifts and things, well wishes were awesome. And instead of it making me bitter, it actually made me embrace a more diverse, I guess you could say, friendship with different people. And I wasn't able to go back to school, obviously, because of my condition. And life took place, time passed, children come. And I wasn't able to finish. So this 2012, years later, obviously, I was able to go to the Learning Bank over in Monroe, Michigan, finish my high school education, and now I am currently in Monroe Community College on my way to what I'm working towards, a career in anesthesiology. So I'll be transferring out to hopefully what is either Wayne State or U of M. So that's my amazing story.
Well, back in 1971, I was 17 years old, and I had a problem because my parents had asked me to break up with my boyfriend, Mike. They felt that we were too young to be getting so serious about each other, and I'd always done well at school, so they had the hope that I would be the first person in our family to go to college. But they also had another plan. They had bought a hotel in South Dakota, and they were planning to move there and take the family with them. And it was my senior year of high school, so I didn't know what to do. I did break up with Mike, and he kept begging me to please, please come back. He didn't want to be broken up with me. So one night he'd been particularly persistent in begging me, and I'd gone home, and I liked to listen to music when I went to sleep. And back in those days you had records that were on the hi-fi, and I'd put on Simon and Garfunkel, my favorite group at the time, their greatest hits. And I'd done a lot of thinking and a lot of crying, and eventually fell asleep. When I woke up, the room was completely dark and completely quiet. Then all of a sudden, the music and the words from "For Emily, Wherever I May Find Her" started to come out of the darkness. And I don't know if you're familiar with the song, but the opening lines are, "What a dream I had, pressed in organdy, clothed in crinoline of smoky burgundy, softer than the rain." And it says that I wandered empty streets down past the shop displays. I heard cathedral bells trickling down the alleyways as I walked on. Then when you ran to me, your cheeks flushed with the night, we walked on frosted fields of juniper and lamplight. I held your hand. Then when I awoke, I felt you warm and near. I kissed your honey hair with my grateful tears. And, "Oh, I love you, girl." Those are the words. And that's what I heard while I laid there in the darkness. And by the time the song was over, I knew what I was going to do. So September of my senior year, my husband and I got married. We now have 10 children. Our 12th grandchild is expected on our 42nd anniversary in September. So I guess Simon and Garfunkel worked out okay for me. That's my story.
Hi, my name is Yana Stewart. I'm a physician, family practice physician in Monroe, Michigan. My story is when I first came to United States of America. I was 12 years old, and I have brought my two brothers. Stephen, he was 6 years old, and Robert was 3 years old. I brought them over by myself because my parents already came to the United States a year before, ahead. And my mother, she's an OBGYN physician, but because she's coming to USA, she needed to do a residency program. So she was already in the St. Vincent Hospital in Toledo, Ohio, OBGYN residency program. And then my father was in a PhD program and University of North Dakota. So they were anxiously waiting for three of us. I was in the 7th grade class in Korea. That would be the first grade of the junior high. And I was pulled out of my class, and my grandmother said, we have to go to Seoul, Korea, because we lived in Gwangju, Korea, which is a very southern province of South Korea. So our second aunt lived in Seoul, Korea, and so 3 of us, along with my grandmother, traveled up to Seoul, Korea. And we were young, and my little brother, Robert, was only 3 years old, and he loved my grandmother, and he was right by her side, and he loved grandmother's earlobe. So he was always holding my grandmother with the earlobe on the other hand. That was like his security blanket for him. On the other hand, my other brother, Steve, he was big terror, and he was just swaggering inside and outside the house, even though there was an aunt's house. And then one day, we were playing a game, and he was somewhat upset. I think he was losing that game, and he was very mad, and he came after me with a chopstick to stab me. So I was running for my life. Anyways, soon our passport was ready. So we were boarded in the airplane. And at that point, I was only 12 years old, and I figure my aunt and my relatives has arranged our flight from Korea to the USA, our final destination in Detroit, Michigan. So we all, 3 of us got in the airplane, and we were somewhat a little scared and skeptical. The biggest problem of all was that none of us knew how to speak English. And, but stewardess were wonderful. They were so helpful in every way. And what first thing totally startled me was their huge blue eyes. I'd never seen a big eyes before like that in my life. And I thought almost like a peculiar aliens, you know, but they were very nice. And I think it is just a different culture, different place where I'm from. And so later on, my brother, Stephen, was getting a little fidgety, sitting in there in the airplane for 10 hours. He was squirming and had spilled the Coca-Cola. And again, the stewardess came over and cleaned the whole plate and even the floor. And even though I couldn't speak, and then I tried to present, you know, thankfulness, but they were smiling the whole time as they were cleaning. So I was very appreciative. And my robber, he was a little crying and whimpering, and I think he was looking for my grandmother and her earlobe. And finally, we arrived in Detroit, and we were so glad to see my mother and father, and we just ran and hugged my mother. And my mother looked at me and my brother, and she tried to hug my youngest brother, obviously, he was only 3 years old. But unfortunately, that my robber cried aloud and started hugging me more, and because it's been too long. It's been a year for my brother. He has forgotten my parents, especially my mother. So that moment brought tears and a stabbing pain to my mother's heart. Even after that, every night my robber cried and cried and cried. And my mother, she was a resident in the St. Vincent Hospital, so she was working day and night. And she was so tired and exhausted trying to take care of us, and especially the 3-year-old who was just crying all night long. So finally, she gave a little bit of a sleeping elixir to my youngest brother, and finally he slept. And we are all getting ready for, this was a trip to the United States, and 5 of us finally started our journey in the USA.
Hi, I'm Kevin Stewart, and the one amazing story I would like to share is quite a few years back, I spent a year as a volunteer firefighter. And the main part of being a volunteer firefighter, or actually a firefighter period, is mostly rescue calls, at least in a community like this. Do a lot of medical calls. And I was fortunate enough to be on one call. It was for a nosebleed. I'm thinking, people consider that something minor normally, and that's what we thought. But when we showed up, we found out that this woman actually had brain cancer. And the tumor had pressed down enough, and she was just bleeding profusely out of her nose. Nothing we could do. We just kind of, put gauze on her, pack her up, put her in the ambulance so she go off to the hospital. That wasn't the important part. I mean, we had a lot of senior officers were there on the call, and they took care of her. What was amazing for me was her son, about 6, maybe 7 years old, freaking out. His mom is, we're in there, strangers all over his mom. He doesn't know what's going on, and he's crying. I was a junior on the team, so a probie as they called me. So I grabbed the kid. I was not necessary for this. I was just an extra body. So I grabbed the kid, took him aside, grabbed the spare medical bag, put a blood pressure cuff on him, did the stethoscope, let him listen to his own heartbeat. I just kind of talked to him. This is what we're doing to your mommy right now. See, look at this. You look over there. You see they got the blood pressure cuff on her. See, I'm doing it to you. See, you can do it to me. We, trade back and forth. And I just talked to the kid, and he calmed down, and he was okay with everything. He watched us. I took him outside, loaded her. He watched us load her into the ambulance, and she went away, and he was okay. Someone else, I think his aunt was there to watch him. And he just kind of waved by. He said, wave by your mom, you'll get to see her in a little bit. And he did that, and he was fine. And that's one moment that stands out to me is I made a difference in an uncontrollable situation, in a situation where we were inept. I mean, there's nothing we could do for her. I could do something for him. Whether he remembers it or not, I don't know, but that's something I will never forget. And that's my one amazing thing.
Hi, I'm Bill Thomas.
And I'm Carolyn Thomas.
And we're here
to tell our amazing,
amazing story. A few years back, I came from Indianapolis to Monroe, Michigan, and I came into a small church to do some music, and the service had started. I heard the door open. I turned around and looked back, and I saw Carolyn as she walked in.
Late as usual, just like I come in here today, late.
And the Lord spoke to me and said, "That's your wife." And I was amazed. I fell instantly in love, and I kept staring at her.
Yeah, he did. He kept looking, and I didn't want him to keep looking. And I thought, why can't he just turn around and leave me alone? I wasn't there for anybody to look at me. I wanted to just love on God because God has changed my life. And so the service went on, and he got up to play music. And when he began to play the guitar and sing, the love of God was coming out of his face. It was just amazing. And I remember thinking to myself, look at the love coming out of that man's face. And I just began to turn my heart back toward God and just worship him. And then the service went on.
And I continued to play and sing, and I looked out at her, and the same thought came across my mind that I was there to worship the Lord, not to be looking at her. But afterwards, I had a few words to speak to her and encouraged her, and she had some words to speak to me, and she said to me,
I said that God was going to bring him a wife, and she would love him for who he was, and she would appreciate his music and everything that God had put inside of him. And then he says to me, I love you now, and I love you forever. Well, at that moment, you can imagine what I thought. I wanted to just run, but I knew at that moment that I loved this man that I never had ever met before. Then I ran.
And as she ran out the door, I'd never understood what grieving was until the door closed. I realized the very person that I loved instantly was gone out of my life without a trace of where she lived, what her number was, or how to ever find her again. And the only thing was I had given her a card with my phone number on it.
So I called and told him, I don't know who you are, but I love you. And our story ends with 2 years later, we were married, and here we sit today to tell you our amazing story.
In 2004, my mother passed away, and my brother and 3 sisters and I went through her effects, as good children will, and we came up with boxes and that hidden in the basement in corners of closets. And one of my sisters called out and says, "Hey, I found a paper." And there was a newspaper. It was a Monroe Evening News, and the date was Thursday, May 18th, 1961. And they did not know the reason or the importance of this paper. However, I did. In the paper, on the top of the fold is a picture of a fire that occurred down in Front Street and Macomb. There's another picture of that fire at the bottom, and there was another picture on the back page of the paper as well. This was a fire that was a 3-alarm fire that closed down Front Street and Macomb Street. But there was a quote from it. It said, "5 youthful spectators approached Sergeant Charles E. Moore yesterday as the fire raged and told him of seeing 3 youths walking from the rear of the Eat More lunch. When the fire started, the trio said they must have started the blaze. They left the scene on bicycles." I was one of those 3 young boys. I had just turned 11 years old. I had been smoking for a long time. And a friend of ours who actually lived right next door to Pete's Eatmore, which I think is now Rourke's Tavern, he lived in a house right next to Elliott's. Now, Elliott's is no longer there, but Elliott's was an appliance store, and right on Macomb Street, as you walk toward Front Street, you will still notice it is a metal set of stairs. And we would climb up there, go up those stairs, and find a little corner where we would smoke. And it was a good hiding place. We never had any problems with it until one day in May, it must have been May 17th, we were smoking up there and decided to take our cigarettes, and instead of putting them on the ground and crushing them like a man does with his feet, we threw them down some pipes. We walked down snuck down the stairs again and met a couple of kids, and we told them we had been up there smoking, we've done this a lot, and sometime if they want to come up and smoke with us, they're more than free to. Well, I remember walking across Macomb Street Bridge on our way home. We all lived on the north side of the river. And when we turned around, we saw flames and smoke coming out of this building. And so we decided we better run away. And so we were on our bikes, and we went home. We ran away the next day, but that's another story you will not get into today. One of my friends who was involved in this caper called me up and asked me whether or not I was afraid of what we had done. Well, on the other line was my sister, who had answered the phone. We had one of those houses that had a couple of phones, and before she hung up, she heard my friend say, "Bill, are you afraid?" And I said no, and we talked for a little bit. But when I was done talking on the phone, she had come to me and she says, "What are you afraid of?" She was an older sister, and I had not yet learned the techniques to kind of deflect this kind of deep interrogation, so I cracked. And I told her everything. She immediately ran up and told my dad and my mother. They were not happy. My parents decided it was a good idea to go call the parents of the other 2 boys. I did not think that was a good idea either. They did not understand what happens to snitches and rats on playgrounds. Well, anyway, the police found out. The police were informed. I remember being called out of school It was St. John's, actually. And we had to go down to the police station and sit around a big table and talk to Fire Detective Holmes, Chief Peters, and a number of other people. And we, of course, had to explain and tell our story. Of course, we all got into trouble. All of us got into a little bit of different trouble, but I was basically grounded in my room for the rest of the summer. That's what I did. Other people didn't get as much punishment, and I was angry for them, but I've forgiven them. My mother always said, because we talk about this, and my mother would always tell me, Bill, you know, I forgive you for what you've done when you were 11 years old. You haven't really turned out that badly. But when my mother passed away in 2004, as I said, I realized that when I looked at this paper, she had forgiven me, but she hadn't forgotten.
Hello, I'm Kelly Burgess, and this is How I Saved a Life. For a large majority of my life, I've always decided that I wanted to be an everyday hero, like a cop or a firefighter. But as I grew older, I decided that I wanted to become a paramedic instead. I joined a training program my senior year so that I could, learn to save lives, become a better medical professional. So I did. And this is my first day on the job. When you go on your first day on the job, you are stuck with 1, an EMT, 2, a paramedic, all your supplies, of course, and you as the trainee. The paramedic had to leave early that day. It was a regular day, and we hadn't had many calls. The first call that I actually had to show up onto was just somebody had passed out and they needed help. So the EMT and I took our trip over there. Being left alone, not having any unusual conversation, my head just started thinking what if this call's a little bit different? No sooner did I arrive on scene to see the unconscious man begin to take his pulse, realizing this man didn't have a pulse. Reaching down, trying to grab over his chest, this man was not breathing, and I immediately sprung into action. Immediately, family members started getting very upset, and we had to take their son away into the ambulance. I had to perform CPR in the back of an ambulance for close to 20 minutes, hoping this man's life would be saved. And within the mile of coming into this hospital, the AED, which is an automatic emergency defibrillator, rescued this man's heart, and he went into the hospital perfectly conscious. I'm Kelly Burgess, and this is How I Saved a Life.
It was February 9th, and I was going to give birth to my daughter. I had been waiting a whole week because she was a week late. And when I got to the hospital and they had me admitted and they told me that I was going to be induced, I spent 12 hours painlessly sitting there, and I didn't feel much. And then about 2 hours before I gave birth to my daughter, there was immense pain, and they had to give me an epidural. And then they told me I was ready to push. So I started pushing, and nothing happened. And I was scared. And then the doctor had me push about 3 or 4, 5, about 8 different times, to be honest. And then it was really scary. He went out into the hallway and he told other doctors that he didn't think that it was going to be a vaginal birth. He came back in and asked me, and I was doped up on medication, what I wanted to do because she wasn't going to come vaginally. I then was scared and just blurted out, I'm on medication, how am I going to make this decision? And I ended up deciding that it would be best to have a C-section. So I went in and they laid me on the table, arms splayed out and a curtain over in front of me. And I just felt pressure in them slicing me open and pulling her out. And it was just the most surreal experience I could ever have had. And after that, them sewing me up was absolutely the most weirdest feeling, and I will never forget it. It just felt like shoelaces, like you tightening your shoelaces. And from that entire experience, I just learned that no matter how many plans you make and what you decide to do, life is going to take its own turns. And I'm kind of glad that it happened the way it did. I have my daughter, she's healthy and she's beautiful, and I wouldn't have wanted it any other way.